Hello, my friends. I know, given the events of this week, a lot of our brains are running wild. So I want to share with you an email that I sent to my list earlier this week. And then I'm going to share a podcast I recorded in 2020, but reflecting on the self-coaching that I had done in 2016, the last time that we had some similar election results. So I'm going to read you my message from today, and then this episode will transition into a replay of that podcast. Dear you, today many of us are reeling. Some of us are afraid, and many other people are celebrating. Elections are a prime example of the fact that circumstances don't cause our feelings. We know that because we see how many people are having the exact opposite reaction to us. But nevertheless, my brain has a lot of thoughts this morning, and maybe yours does too. So here's what I want to offer you. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said, "What is most important is not to allow your anxiety about what happens in the world to fill your heart. If your heart is filled with anxiety, you will get sick and you will not be able to help." Now, of course, you know that I think there's nothing wrong with having any emotion. The point isn't to beat yourself up if you're feeling anxious or to repress your emotions and try to get over them immediately. If you need time to grieve, take time to grieve. But catastrophizing isn't any more useful or accurate just because the national news and everyone else you know is doing it too. Our brains do not actually know what will happen, even if they think they do, because the future has not been created yet, and we are part of creating it. We have a part to play in what comes next. Our worst fears may come to pass, or they may not. No matter how certain your brain thinks it is right now, it does not actually have a crystal ball. But what we can know for sure is that we get to decide how we show up in our own lives, no matter what is happening outside of us. And we get to decide how we want to show up for other people and what we value, what we want to try to build for the future, even if that future does not come today or tomorrow or while we are here to see it. Managing your mind is not something that matters only when things are relatively easy. It matters most when things are really, really hard, because that's when creativity, resilience, and connection matter most. So here are a few things I recommend you do today to keep your feet on the ground and your head clear. I do recommend that you do the first suggestion, grounding, first. But after that, just pick whatever resonates or feels helpful. You do not need to do all of these. So first, ground yourself physically. When our brains are imagining future danger, our bodies think we're literally in physical danger right now, and that sets off our nervous system reactions. There are a lot of sensory techniques that can help bring you back into your body and the present moment. You can Google and find a whole bunch of suggestions. I recommend also doing something today that requires your hands and body if possible. Cook something, clean something, knit something. This helps regulate your nervous system and bring your mind into the present moment. Second, of course, is thought work. You're listening to this. You can listen to the replay of the podcast we're going to share right after this. If you're in the Feminist Self-Help Society, obviously come and get coaching in the Facebook community, submit to Ask the Coaches, watch the replay of the bonus coaching call about election feelings that I'm going to have done by the time you hear this episode. Third, sign up to do something in your community. Your community is the place you can most easily make a concrete difference. If you Google volunteer ideas in your city, you are likely to find a list of current opportunities. If not, then volunteer yourself. Bake something for a sick neighbor. Take your kids to pick up litter on the beach. Take a small action that visibly improves someone else's life. Fourth, get a dose of connection and an oxytocin boost from your personal life. Hug a friend or family member, snuggle a pet, or FaceTime someone you love if you can both agree to not spend the whole time spitting about the election. Ask to see their baby or their cat, or show them yours. Fifth, if you do nothing else, at least please stop scrolling the news. Your brain thinks that it's important to know exactly what's happening with anything it has identified as a threat 24/7. But the more time you spend staring at your phone, the more that your thoughts and the internet feel like all of reality. If you get stuck in this loop, go back to suggestion 1 on the list and ground. History is always a comfort to me in times like these, not because things have always worked out for everyone, which obviously they have not, but because humans have always lived our simultaneously vast and tiny lives in the shadow of enormous world events we cannot always control. We never know how long we have on this earth or what will happen to us while we are here, but we always get to choose who we will be and how we will meet the conditions of our lives. Don't ever let anyone or anything convince you that you don't have that choice too. That is my message for you today. And next, you're going to hear my words from a few years ago on the podcast. Same situation. Here we are again. Thought work is always there for us, and nature and history tend to cycle. So what we need to do is focus on how we show up to meet the moment, whatever the moment includes. Welcome to Unfuck Your Brain. I'm your host, Cara Lowenthal, Master Certified Coach and founder of the School of New Feminist Thought. I'm here to help you turn down your anxiety, turn up your confidence, and create a life on your own terms, one that you're truly excited to live. Let's go. Hello, my chickens. How are we doing? Are we doing okay? The U.S. presidential, House, some Senate elections are coming up very soon, along with various other state races. And I've noticed in every meeting I've been in this week, whoever I'm meeting with is very stressed out about the elections, including people like my Facebook funnel consultant, who's a Canadian who lives in Canada. She doesn't live here or vote here. And so many people are cycling between anxiety and optimism or hope and despair. I think there's a lot of election kind of residual trauma from 2016, and people are really sort of terrified of potential outcomes and afraid to be hopeful or embrace any optimism because they think that's going to jinx it or set them up to feel worse down the line. So I wanted to record this episode to revisit some of what I teach about anxiety and calm and hope and despair and how we deal with it when the world is not doing what we want it to, or we're worried that it won't do what we want it to. So depending on when you're listening to this, there are a few different scenarios that could be playing out. I mean, let's be real. 2020 has taught us anything. It's that we are terrible at predicting the future. So there are probably 600 million scenarios that could be playing out. I'm only naming 3. It's possible that the candidate you wanted to win has won, and that's that, in which case, yay, although you still may want to listen to this episode because it really applies to things other than elections. It's possible the candidate you wanted to win has lost, that's that, and you feel ugh and terrible and scared and depressed, and then you should definitely listen to this. And it's possible that the election hasn't happened yet, or it's happened and the winner isn't clear yet, in which case you are in uncertainty, which is a double ugh for your brain, right? Regardless of which way you go. So in that case, also definitely listen to this. And you'll notice I'm not naming candidates. Now, that's not because I'm hiding my positions, right? My politics are a 0% secret on this podcast. But brains are brains, regardless. And this episode is not just about this one upcoming election. It's about any kind of big uncertainty in your future or any election. I mean, for all I know, you listening don't care about the presidential election, but you're really fixated on a race for the school board in your district, right? So this podcast applies and is relevant for anything you're fearing in the future, especially something that is sort of very out of your control. And certainly applies to any kind of election, not just the upcoming November 3rd, 2021. So the first thing to understand about anxiety about an election outcome or any future outcome is that we are confused about what we're afraid about. We are not actually afraid of the circumstance that may happen. Who occupies the presidency in America is a neutral circumstance, meaning that human brains look at the same fact of who is president and have very different thoughts about it. Right? So that's what all we mean when we say neutral circumstance. Doesn't mean I think you should feel neutral about it. That's not what it means. It means it's a thing in the world, a fact in the world that a human mind creates meaning about. And we know that because human minds have created very different meaning about this for the last 4 years, right? We see that all around us. Human brains in this country have very different thoughts about the president or people in any other elected office. And no matter who has ever held any office, humans have had very different thoughts about them. If you've ever been involved in local politics, you know people can have vociferous opinions about the smallest town political position too. So when we are afraid of a future circumstance, it's not actually the circumstance that we fear. Our fear is based on what we are making a potential circumstance mean in our minds. We think about a certain person being elected and we feel anxiety or fear because we have a story about what that will mean for us or for the country or for someone we care about or for the institution of democracy or whatever it is that we have identified as being at risk in our minds. So the first step is always to locate and identify what that meaning is that you are creating with your mind. What are the sentences in your mind about what will happen if a certain person is in office versus a different person? Fundamentally, when you have a human brain, if you tell yourself something bad may happen in the future, you will fixate on it until it happens. I am aware of no workaround for this. If you had the kind of brain that could just shrug a thought off, then you would not be here listening. And if I had that kind of brain, I would not be recording this. Most human brains react to the threat of danger by fixating on the danger until it has passed. But even when you're thinking that there's a physical or economic or other concrete danger in the future, that's still not what you're actually afraid of. What you're actually afraid of is how you are going to feel in the future, the negative emotion that you anticipate having if something happens. Circumstances don't cause our feelings, even circumstances that everyone around us agrees are bad. Losing a job doesn't cause our feelings. Losing a loved one doesn't cause our feelings. Losing an election doesn't cause our feelings, even if we're the person who lost the election. Physical illness or danger doesn't cause our feelings. It is always our thoughts about these things that cause our feelings. The world is full of people who react to the same circumstance, however quote unquote trivial it is, or however quote unquote serious it is, in very different ways, because their thoughts about the circumstance are different. There are people who get a stage 3 cancer diagnosis and take that in stride with equanimity, and there are people who have intense fear and anxiety and panic attacks about finding out that they have a few precancerous cells. I'm not saying one's better or worse. One person isn't a better person or more moral or more evolved or anything else. It's just that two different people and two different brains have two different sets of thoughts that cause two different emotions, not the circumstance. I always feel like I have to say every time, I'm not telling you not to have any thoughts or feelings. I'm not telling you that you should feel any particular way. I'm not saying you should feel terrified. I'm not saying you should feel happy. I'm not saying you should feel neutral. It's always up to you how you want to feel. But it's important to know that you're the one causing the feelings you're having with your thoughts. Because of this irony that the thing you're most scared of is actually how you will feel in the future. And that's not created by the circumstance. It's created by your thoughts. You're fearing what your unmanaged mind you predict will make you feel. Ironically, that means you're doing it now already, right? When you imagine the future circumstance, you imagine what you'll think, and then you have that feeling. You're afraid of that feeling, but you're already having that feeling now. Because imagining a thought you'll think in the future is the same as thinking it now as far as your brain's concerned. So on top of that, there's also in this scenario often uncertainty about the future, and that's something your brain hates as well, right? So for instance, we're currently living in a reality with a certain president when I'm recording this, October 2020. One of the options ahead of us is that this president will continue to be the president. That's actually not a change in circumstances. That's the circumstance staying the same. But because we've introduced uncertainty as to whether it'll happen or not, that dials up the intensity for our brains seeking danger and freaking out. If you are a therapist, if you have a therapist, if you know a therapist, if you love a therapist, I have two pieces of incredible news for you. The first is that we have created a free guide called Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy, 3 ways to deepen rapport, get better results, and blow your clients' minds. And I know that's not exactly therapy language, but you get the point. This is a totally free guide that you can grab at feministtherapy.com. That's feministtherapy.com. And you can grab the guide there. And it's really designed to help you take the kind of framework that I teach on this podcast and start to integrate it into your sessions in a way that doesn't have anything to do with like your political positions or your client's political positions necessarily. And when you get that guide and you sign up for that guide, you're going to get added to our list to be on the early announcement for something I am super excited about, a brand new program that I'm offering just for therapists who want to integrate feminist coaching perspectives, the feminist socialization lens into their practice. It's not specifically coaching tools. As a therapist, you have your own tools, you have your own methodology and modality. This program will give you access to my tools in case you want to use them, but it's really about integrating a feminist lens into your practice. So that's all I can say about the program right now. It is still top secret. It's not released to the public yet. But when you come and download this free guide that I created, Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy, you will automatically get put on that early bird list to hear about that program as soon as it's announced. All you need to do right now is go to feministtherapy.com or text your email to +1 347 997 1784, and the code word is therapy. +1 347 997 1784. Text us your email. You're going to get a text back asking for the code, and the code word is therapy, and we will send it straight to you. So our fear is always about what we think now, what we predict now, we will think and feel in the future. Right? The future does not exist. We do not actually have any idea what's going to happen. If we have not learned that from 2020, we may never learn it. But in the current moment, our fear and anxiety and dread are all because we are mentally believing that we do know what will happen and that we will not be able to manage our minds if it does. Right? We are imagining that if this thing happens in the future, I will feel a way I don't want to feel. Okay? The part of your brain that manufactures fear is not the same part that understands political theory and reads spreadsheets. The part that creates fear is a very primitive part of your brain. It's just afraid that it will feel scared because it associates that with physical danger. Future anxiety is fear that you are going to feel scared in the future. So you get scared now, right? This is what I was saying about that irony before. Or you anticipate that you'll feel depressed, so you get depressed now. So I think I've told the story on the podcast before, but it's really instructive for this exact scenario. So I'm going to tell it again. When Trump won the election in 2016, I momentarily, like many people, lost my mind. I had all this anxiety and I was a little bit perplexed because I was already a coach. I was in the middle of my master coach certification, really had done a lot of work on my anxiety and fear about the future, but this was sort of felt out of my control. Of course, it was not. I just didn't understand it yet. So here's what it turned out was going on in my brain. If you can remember 2016, which was 8 million years ago, Steve Bannon was very close to Trump, and he was, kind of characterized or outed as being anti-Semitic. And there was talk about kind of white nationalism and Nazis in the White House. So I'm Jewish, obviously. Well, I don't know about obviously, but I talk about it on the podcast all the time. And I was raised with a lot of kind of residual Holocaust trauma. When and where I was growing up, at least, or the way I was raised, Jewish kids were taught about the Holocaust very young. And, it's kind of terrifying for small brains that don't understand what's going on. So I had Holocaust dreams for my whole life until probably a few years ago when I really worked through this. And I'm not sort of blaming anyone for this. This is how trauma gets passed down through generations. But, anyone, obviously many peoples have gone through experiences like this. There are many people who are raised in cultures or families where there's a legacy of genocide or a legacy of violence. And so I think, a lot of us can identify with this, becomes this kind of omnipresent thing in your mind, especially if you're taught about it young when you can't really process it and don't know how to make sense of it. And so what I realized was that when Trump was elected, this Holocaust anxiety got reawakened by his election and this idea that there were Nazi sympathizers in power, right? This was kind of waking up that thought pattern. And in this very specific way, I became really fixated on this very specific fear that I was not going to know when I should leave. So one of the things I heard growing up about the Holocaust all the time was that there were people who saw what was coming and they left and they survived. right? There were people who saw what was happening. They were like, oh, this is getting bad. This doesn't look good. I think this is going a bad way. We got to get out of here. They left and survived. And that there were people who stayed, who told themselves it wouldn't get that bad. These things weren't going to really happen. And then they died. It's very simplistic, obviously, but that was the message. That's what I took away from it, right? Who knows about brains? Who knows what I was really told? That's what I took away from it as a kid. So my brain saw what it thought was a danger, that there were Nazis in power, Jews were going to end up in concentration camps again. And it became really fixated on how to keep me safe. And of course, part of the way that as a kind of religious minority, it was very easy for my brain to tell me that anybody who was coaching me about this who wasn't Jewish just didn't really understand, right? So I doubled down on this, even though my brain was kind of losing it. I was like doubling down on it with this sort of, well, if you're not Jewish, you don't understand, right? It's like, you can't coach me about this, which was not true. I was being completely illogical, but this is what happens in your brain. So in my brain, I was like, okay, there's this danger. And when we see something we're afraid of, we want to believe we can control it. Either we just think we have no control over anything, and not only will the thing happen, but it'll make us feel terrible and we throw up our hands. Or we think, okay, let me just try to control this one thing. If I can just control this one thing, then I don't have to be afraid and I don't have to control, everything else. I don't have to deal with my fear of the things beyond my control. And so for me, I picked knowing when to leave. In my mind, the way to be safe was that I needed to know when I should leave. In this fantasy my brain had made up, where we were ending up in concentration camps. So this is not accurate, right? Anything can happen. You can accurately predict violence or genocide and leave and then, fall overboard on the boat on the way to the next country. Or you can totally miss it, not predict it, stay where you are and survive, and a million other things can happen, right? It's always an illusion when we think we can control the future by knowing it. But this is just what my brain was doing. So I was going back and forth about this. I was really fixated on this fear that I wouldn't know when it was time to leave. Like, I need to know when, what are the standards? What are the rules? What are the signs? When will I know? That's what I had all this anxiety about. And so then I finally got coaching on it, and I convinced my brain that we did need to listen to someone coaching me, even if they weren't Jewish, thank goodness. And this is what I realized. My fear was not that I would miss the point of no return and then experience hardship or even atrocity. It wasn't those circumstances that I was going to, in my mind, experience that I feared. It was that I was believing that if I missed my chance to leave, then I would have to be terrified and despair. I was believing that at a certain point, I would not be able to manage my mind. That if I stayed too long and the time to leave passed, my emotional state would be unbearable. That I would be terrified, that I would blame myself, that I would tell myself I should have left, I should have gotten out, that I had made a mistake, right? And that sort of my emotional life was going to be completely determined by whatever these external conditions were that were going to happen. I was basically believing, right, that I could totally manage my mind up until a concentration camp. And then at that point, I'd forget everything I knew. I'd have no control over my mind, and I would have to live in terror and despair. That's what my brain was telling me. But of course, once we surfaced this thought, I was able to see and remember that that's not true. Right? One of my favorite kind of thought work heroes, although he would not have called it thought work, of course, is Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he has a famous quote in that book, which I'm paraphrasing, but it's basically, he says, the last freedom left to man, let's say human, it's left to people of all gender identities, the last freedom left to man, or human, is the freedom to choose his own attitude in the face of any set of circumstances. Right? The last freedom left to man is the freedom to choose his own attitude in the face of any circumstance, in the face of any reality, in the face of any set of, facts outside of us. This is also, by the way, why I just laugh when people think that thought work is, like white lady nonsense for the 1% or whatever. It's literally, I think, after being able to find food and make fire, the most fundamental survival skill you need. And the most powerful testimonies to this kind of work are the testimonies from people who have survived the unsurvivable and found the will to go on. Like, that is why this work matters. So when I finally saw that this is what was happening, I was assuming there was a set of circumstances in which I would be no longer able to manage my mind, right? If I missed the cutoff point, then that was it. I would not be able to manage my mind at all. I realized that's where that desperate fear was coming from. It was the belief that there was this potential future where I was going to be experiencing all of this emotional suffering as if someone could take away my own ability to decide how I wanted to think and feel, how I wanted to view the world. That powerlessness is what we really fear, which is a feeling, right? What we fear is the feeling of powerlessness. That, I think, is what we are really fearing when we fear that certain circumstances will happen. We fear that emotional experience. When we fear, we're not thinking, okay, well, these circumstances will happen, and I know how to manage my mind. I know how to be resourceful. I know how to allow emotion. I know how to take care of myself. I know how to show up with resilience and bravery in this world. When we're thinking that, we're not afraid, right? We may be nervous, right? We may be, courage requires some fear, right? That's what bravery is, but we are not when we think that way, we are not panic-stricken. We are not hopeless. We are not overwhelmed. We are not despairing, right? It's not about the circumstance. It's about how we think we are going to feel, and the fear of that powerlessness, that feeling of powerlessness, that's what we fear the most, right? That's what we are afraid of. We are afraid that we will suffer in that way and that we will have no say in our suffering. But we always have a say in how we respond to our suffering. We always have a say in how we respond to any set of circumstances. And when you believe that, when you remember that, you don't have to live in fear of the future. Okay? So let me touch on kind of the biggest objection you may have hearing this, because you may have found this freaking out and not listen to any of the rest of the podcast, which is totally fine. But the kind of most commonplace objection is basically, but things are going to get really bad for people, and you're saying we should just be chill and not care. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, number one, things are going to get really bad. That's an optional thought, and you should check and see what kind of results you get before choosing to think it. When you think that thought, is that creating productive action for you? Whatever your goal is. Are you making a voting plan? Are you helping other people vote? Are you creating policy plans? Are you researching where you want to move, right? Whatever approach you're going to take, are your thoughts about this election or any election or whatever you're applying this to, are they producing the action that you want to take? Is it producing the action that'll move you towards the world you want to have and create and live in and the life you want to have? It's not about like, oh, just don't care about anything, right? It's about thinking and feeling on purpose so that you have resilience, so that you have creativity, so that you have the ability to show up for the life you want. Whether, the politics are going the way you want and you can expand, do more work to expand even more things you care about, or when they're not going the way you want and you need to show up with resilience and creativity and courage for your survival, whichever one it is. So if you want a refresher on this, I suggest going back to the episode I have called What About Sexism? I talk about emotional versus political resistance in that episode. You may want to politically resist what's happening now or will happen in the future, but your emotional resistance is just burning you out and preventing you from actually doing that. Managing your mind is the best thing you can do for yourself and the best thing you can do for the world. And the president can't take away your ability to manage your mind. Steve Bannon, as I discovered, can't take away my ability to manage my mind. Your senator can't take it away. Your school board chair can't take it away. You're the only one who has power over your own mind. So use it on purpose and use it wisely.
All right, my chickens, have a good week, and I will talk to you soon.
If you're loving what you're learning on the podcast, you have got to come check out the Feminist Self-Help Society. It's our newly revamped community and classroom where you get individual help to better apply these concepts to your life, along with a library of next-level, blow-your-mind coaching tools and concepts that I just can't fit in a podcast episode. It's also where you can hang out, get coached, and nerd out about all things thought work and feminist mindset with other podcast listeners just like you and me. It's my favorite place on earth, and it will change your life, I guarantee it. Come join us at www.unfuckyourbrain.com/society. I can't wait to see you there. If you're a therapist and you find yourself getting kind of stuck in certain loops with clients who have been socialized as women around people-pleasing, perfectionism, self-worth, concern about others' perception of them, those kinds of topics, I want to offer you a free tool that will help you. It's called Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy: 3 Ways to Deepen Rapport, Get Better Results, and Blow Your Clients' Minds. It's an absolutely free guide that I wrote because I hear from therapists so often that the socialization lens that I am teaching was not included in their education or their training, and that it is so helpful. And they're trying to apply it based on my podcast or even taking my programs. But I want to create something that was really designed for therapists. So that is what this guide is. It will teach you how to identify that social messaging. It will show you how it's impacting your client's self-esteem, and it will teach you how you can empower your clients more effectively by showing them how socialization may be affecting them. They'll also share some stories from therapists who use these tools about how validating and empowering their clients find it and why it's been such a big boost for their practice. I'm also getting ready to announce in the near future a totally new program that I'm offering just for therapists who want to integrate a feminist lens and the socialization lens specifically into their practice. You will automatically be put on the early bird interest list for that when you download the guide. So if you just go and download the guide, not only do you get all the value in the guide, all of the helpful framing and techniques that I suggest, but you'll also be the first to hear about that program. And if you are not a therapist, but you know a therapist, you're friends with a therapist, you have a family member as a therapist, or you talk about the podcast with your therapist, please share the link with them. Super easy to remember. You just go to feministtherapy.com. Couldn't be easier. feministtherapy.com to download that totally free guide. Or you can text your email to +1 347 997 1784, and the code word is therapy. Either way, please download it, read it, bring it to your sessions, share it with the therapist in your life. We can help so many more women with this work if we spread this knowledge.